Welcome to the Parent Guide to GCSE podcast, episode number 15. Today's guest is Uju Asika, who is the author of Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our difficult but important conversations to have with your child. Today, we are here with Uju, who has written a book called Bringing Up Race. So she seemed like the perfect person to talk to about all of this and about how to approach those difficult conversations about racism with your children. So welcome.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very toasty day if you're listening to this later on the podcast. We're all kind of melting at the moment, but it'll be all right. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about the book. When's it coming out? What can we expect from it?
Yes, so Bringing Up Race is subtitled How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. It's out on September 3rd this year. It's available for pre-orders now. On Amazon UK and Waterstones. And it's a book. It's sort of a personal examination of, how racism impacts all our kids, whether they're black, brown, white, and also what we can do as parents to make sure that we raise children who are more empathetic and more open and inclusive. So it's something that obviously is very personal to me as a mum. I interviewed a bunch of other parents, mostly mothers, of different ethnicities. And it's sort of aiming to start a conversation and keep a conversation going.
And perfect timing for release at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable timing. I mean, it's a strange thing because obviously when I was writing it, I had a sort of little voice in the back of my mind thinking, how much am I going to have to convince people, especially the people that I want to reach with the book? How much am I going to have to convince them that racism is still a thing?
There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. No, that racism is still a thing, and also that it affects everyone. So very often people think, it's just racism is that thing that, Black people talk about or minorities talk about, and it doesn't really have much impact. But actually, it's important for everyone to sort of get into this discussion and these understandings.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm coming from the point of view of until it's all been brought up very recently, I would have been one of those people who'd have said, but I'm not a racist because I know that I'm not prejudiced. I don't treat people differently based on their skin color. I would never kind of say anything to deliberately harm someone. And I, up until I've seen all the stories, had assumed that was enough. I'd done what I could do, and that was all I could do, because who am I to make any kind of difference? But all of the stories that are being told lately has made me realize that is not enough, that I need to be anti-racist, not just not a racist. And so we've been trying to have the conversation with our kids, and with varying degrees of success, because I think I got a little bit overly emotional. We showed our daughter the video of Black parents talking to their kids about what to do if you're stopped by the police, and my mum instincts kicked in watching it. And I'm sat there in floods of tears, and I think she feels why, and she understands, but that's not the best way to have the conversation, because it shouldn't be about my emotions about things. So what's a good way to start that kind of conversation? How would you begin the process of talking about this stuff with your kids? Any tips for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of having a conversation, I think give yourself grace, allow yourself to be human, allow yourself to have emotions around this issue. It is charged. It is really painful in many ways. It is going to make you feel guilty and upset and worried and all these things. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to be honest with your children about how you feel, because I think children appreciate honesty. which is not to say that you want to just come and like flood them with, you know, everything you're feeling and everything you're thinking. I think it's, you know, it's just sort of take it at their own pace and take it at your pace. You know, one thing is just to ask, you know, ask a question, just start a question, you know, how do you feel about, you know, your skin color? Have you ever felt anything about, you know, most children these days, well, depends where you are, but many of them are raised around people of different ethnicities. So, you know, ask them like what kind of conversations have they had with their friends about these issues, you know, sort of hear from them as well, because it's always a conversation. It's not a lecture. So, you know, can start with a question. You can share your own experiences. You can talk about the fact that, you know, maybe when you were growing up, you were taught something different, or you were taught to use different words, or, you know, or you just never spoke about it at all. And, you know, you want to do something different with your own children. So it's a good place to start. And obviously now, I mean, I'm sure you've seen lots of sort of anti-racist reading lists and all this floating around the internet, and you know, those are really helpful. You know, I have a chapter in my book called "Books Will Save the World," which I really think books will save the world. And one of the things is, you know, picking up books that are about people of different cultures that center a Black hero. And it's not always, you know, it's important to read books that are for education. But I think also just stories are really important. So, you know, start with stories and let those lead your conversations.
I'm also finding I'm much more aware at the moment of the shows that she's watching on TV and how diverse they are, and whether they are in fact representative of all the different cultures and ethnicities that we are surrounded by. I mean, we're in a fairly multicultural city in Peterborough, and obviously in London, you've got kind of everyone and everything, and it's not represented as well as that in a lot of shows that we watch. It's almost noticeable when there's a show that does represent people of color in you know, positions of authority and as the stars of the show and things like that. Shonda Rhimes obviously does it amazingly, I think, in a lot of different ways, and she brings up a lot of the issues as well, because stuff like Miranda Bailey in Grey's Anatomy had to sit down and talk to her son, who is a young Black man, about, I think he locked his key and was trying to get in through the window or look for the key under the mat, and it could have gone very, very wrong. And they'd had a case in the hospital the day before where it had gone very wrong for a lad in a similar situation. And seeing those kind of experiences is really helpful in terms of opening your eyes, because if you don't experience something, it's really difficult to get your head around how it feels when you do experience it. And I think that's been the issue for a lot of parents that I've spoken to, when they've said, you know, we're trying to have these conversations about race with our children, but we don't know, we don't understand, because we've not been there. So is there anything that you found, particularly in terms of kind of more kids' TV programs, that you've been impressed with in terms of their diversity, that you thought that's a good set of role models? I like that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Sorry, one sec.
This is the joy of live. Our kids do it to us as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think growing up, for instance, I grew up, you know, I was born in Nigeria and I grew up mostly in the UK. And, you know, if I saw a Black person on TV, it was very much like, oh, you know, whoa, good times, you know. And so representation is really, really important, not just as someone growing up as a minority, but also for, as you said, for putting you inside someone else's skin. You know, stories are so important for that. Some of the shows we like to watch, I mean, we watch a variety of shows, but we also actively seek out shows that are, you know, representative. For instance, Blackish. I don't know if you know the show Blackish on Netflix. That's like a show about a Black family. and it's very entertaining. So that's one thing I recommend, because you don't always want something that's really heavy-handed, and everyone, sometimes a lot of the recommendations are like just really like heavy and difficult and sober, and for kids you want something lighter and fun and you can all engage with. So Blackish is really good. There was a show called Raising Dion on Netflix, which I referenced in my book as well, because it's about a young Black boy who discovers he's a superhero. And so it's really about his mother. His mom is a single mom. And so she then finds out her son is a superhero, and it's like, how does she deal with this? So it's great, because it's a story, it's a sci-fi movie, it's very inclusive. One of his friends, has she's in a wheelchair, but there's nothing sort of patronizing about it in any way. And there's also a scene in which the mum talks to her son about an incident of racial bullying, and then she has to talk with him about the fact that he is not going to appeal to everybody, and how there are people in the world who are just not going to like him because of the color of his skin. So it's quite a painful conversation, but it's really well handled, because you see that she just tells it like it is, and she doesn't try to like soft soap it, and she doesn't pretend she has all the answers, and she just lets him know. And yeah, it's a good show. So I recommend that. And there's a bunch, like for younger kids, there's a show called Beano and Fino, which is, I think it's like possibly Africa's first animated TV show for kids. So it's set in Nigeria, but it's been on, it's on, you can find it on the internet, but it's been on like, terrestrial TV as well. And they're doing pretty well. And it's very engaging, and it talks about, different cultures and stuff.
We've been, sorry, I'm interrupting. We've been doing the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air again recently.
Oh, yeah.
We really enjoyed, and they do a great job of going between just super entertaining, hilarious TV, and then these sudden moments of seriousness where you do get an understanding. So that's that we've really, really enjoyed. Sorry, you were going to.
I was going to say, obviously it's a huge topic in the news at the moment, and that's reflected in my social media, particularly my Facebook feed. So many comments, generally really positive, people considering what's going on out there. But also, even with my own Facebook friends, who I like to think are relatively like-minded, the amount of nonsense I've seen posted is just, staggering, frankly. It's a very good way to clear out your Facebook friends. Yeah. Concern is, though, with the children, two of them are obviously on Facebook, what would they be seeing, and how would you deal with that? Because we don't obviously look at what they're doing. They're 18 now, and we have to trust that they're acting responsibly and taking what they see, I don't know, with a pinch of salt, or kicking back against it. But that's my big concern, is the social media element at the moment.
I guess it's kind of their bubble, the people that you surround yourself with. You tend to think like them, and so it's important to have some more diverse opinions in your social media feed, so that you get a bit more of a feel for the world. Yeah. So things like, I guess my big question is, how do I teach my child, our children, to be a better ally? Because it's all very well saying don't treat people differently because of their race, but that isn't enough, as we know. So what sort of things should they be looking out for? Where can they be making a difference? What can they do?
I think there are just so many ways. Always starts with your approach. And I think the approach is really sort of constantly wanting to learn, and constantly being willing to change, and not being defensive about stuff, which is a big thing, because it's very difficult, having conversations with people who are defensive, So it's always sort of being willing to accept, there's a phrase, white privilege, that is bandied about and, rubs a lot of people that up the wrong way. And now more people are starting to understand what it means. I don't bang on about white privilege in my book, because I'm like, sometimes you can get so hung up on a phrase that you're missing the point. And the point is that, if you have, you know, what's that saying? With great power comes great responsibility. If you have power in society, then you can use your power, you know, as a force for good, as a force for change. You know, you can be the voice who speaks up when other people are silenced. You can, you know, you can advocate for people. You can stand, you know, I think many of my white friends will have admitted privately that they've been in situations where, sorry, my kids keep interrupting. They've been in situations where, you know, someone has said something racist in their presence, or something that makes them feel uncomfortable, and they're just not sure how to react, or they go silent. You know, this is your opportunity to speak up and to say, you know, that's not okay, that is racist, you know, call it out. Like, don't be afraid of ruining relationships over it, because, you know, you've got to stand for something. You can't just stay silent when you know that it's wrong. So that would be my first point. Yeah.
Oh, and that was coming back to the social media thing that I talked about. Somebody posted, I think it was an All Lives Matter post, and I was sitting there shaking my head, thinking, and it was a teacher who did it. It just didn't make any sense. And quickly looked down. There's already 20 or 30 comments calling on it, saying, "Mate, you can't do that. It's not on." And that, I think, was really empowering. I think, to see that people were just not happy. They're going to call it, rather than just ignore it and move on to the next Facebook story. They made the time to say, no, that's not good.
Yeah, because there's been so many posts explaining it in a really clear and obvious way. I think the whole, you know, Quickie's broken his leg, call an ambulance. Hang on, what about my leg? That's not, you know, that's not the point. You deal with the emergency, the critical situation. It's not. It's been explained so well in so many different ways that I've seen, that I don't think there's an excuse to not understand that. And I find that frustrating, because I am still seeing bits and blocking people and stuff. I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to be trying to fight for rights, for Black Lives Matter, and have everyone go, oh, but hang on a minute.
Just
yeah, that is something we've discussed with kids.
Yeah, there's a very funny, I'm trying to remember his name now. If you go on YouTube and you search, I think Black Lives Matter comedy or All Lives Matter comedy, I don't know, there's a comedian who, there's a clip of his on YouTube, and it's really funny, and he just handles it perfectly. I'm not going to attempt to, you know, it's never funny when you try and tell a comedian's stand-ups jokes, but it's really worth watching, and it's a good one to show your kids as well, because, you know, if they're old enough. I mean, I watched it with my kids. Mine are 14 and 11, and I don't think there's any swearing in it. But anyway, but it's a good one to watch with yours, like the old kids.
Hilarious and very well handled. We'll try and find the link.
We'll try and find the link and put it in the show notes, along with the link to the book and things as well. So, are there any other kind of what's your kind of big takeaway from the book that people? What's the kind of top tip that we can take away to help us have these conversations?
What's the top tip? I think just, you know, staying open, like I've said, you know, be open to different, not just different people, but different ideas. And this goes for everyone. You know, I'm speaking to Black people, to, you know, Asian people, the Muslim, you know, it's like people can get very entrenched in their own ideas as well. And you can also get very entrenched in your own struggle, you know, and there is more than struggle, and there is more sort of communion you can have just by being open and being more empathetic and being willing to have conversations and to keep having conversations. I think one of my slight concerns with seeing all of these resources floating around everywhere is like, it feels a little bit checklist. Like, I feel like, you know, people are going to be like, oh, I've read this, I've watched that, you know, I've donated here, and now I've solved racism. You know, great, I am no longer a racist, and I can move on. And actually, this is just, it's like a lifelong journey, you know, for those of us who are in darker skin, or, you know, who look different from the mainstream. You know, this is my life. Like, I can't, you know, if I aside, I mean, that we talk about, you know, and the black people talk about like racial fatigue, like race fatigue, like it's exhausting, this whole thing of like constantly having to think about and talk about and deal with the microaggressions and all of this stuff. But at the same time, it's also my life. Like I can't just be like, oh, I'm tired of racism now. That's it. I'm done. I'm moving on. You know, like it's not really going to work out for me. So I think everybody has to acknowledge that this is a lifelong thing. And, you know, if you're committed to being anti-racist, then you're committed for life, not just for this particular moment.
Yeah. So let's talk microaggressions for a minute, because that's the sort of thing that people are doing who wouldn't maybe consider themselves racist, because they're not trying to be deliberately insulting. They're just asking questions that they wouldn't have asked were you not a person of color. So talk to us about microaggressions and the kind of things that we need to avoid doing as people not of color, because frankly it annoys you and it isn't cool, because we need those tips.
There's a long list. It's a long list. You know, I do have a chapter in my book as well, which is on microaggressions. It's called Under the Skin, and it's about the stuff that happens sort of under the skin of polite society, like, you know, especially people who absolutely would never imagine that they were doing anything offensive. You know, they've done studies on microaggressions, and you know, it's really difficult because obviously the person who is the victim of it can feel something, but they can't always put their finger on it as well. And then the person who's doing it often has no idea that it's a microaggression. But I think anything that's like intrusive or assumes that somebody is the other or places them as the other, you know, in any interaction, for instance, you know, I was born overseas. So for me, if you ask me where I'm from, it is a slightly more layered conversation. But there are many people who look exactly like me who are being asked, where are you from? Every single day. And they're like, I'm from Tottenham, or I'm from, you know, I'm literally from like right next door to you. I was born next door to you. Yeah. But, you know, as a white person, you might ask somebody where you're from based off of just looking at their skin color or the fact that they're wearing a turban. Actually, you know, they're British just like you. So, and I think one of the main things for me was my kids' hair, you know, people touching their hair. You know, walking my kids, now their hair is a bit more contained, but they had like very sort of funky, big hair, let it go free. And, you know, walking the streets when they were little, people would just like reach out and grab their hair. And I'm thinking, is this normal? Like, should you be doing this? And they're going, oh, I just love this hair. And it's meant to be a compliment, but actually, you know, he's not a dog, so don't put your hand on my child, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's just sort of checking yourself before, you know, if you're going to ask something that you think to yourself, oh, would I ask this person this if they look like me? Would I, you know, what are my assumptions that I'm making before I launch into this conversation? Yeah, those things. And then if, you know, you're not going to get everything right, because we all do, we all have unconscious biases, we all make sort of implicit judgments. So you're not going to get everything right. So if somebody does call your attention to it, then also honor what they've said. Don't just instantly go, oh no, I didn't mean anything by it, which is what tends to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, kind of learn from it. I always find I get a little bit self-conscious about asking people how to pronounce their name. I asked you before we went on the live stream, which is more, so as a teacher, I've taught kids from all over with all sorts of different names, and I got really good at Polish names because we had and so they're names that I'm familiar with. But when we get kids from kids from Ireland sometimes who have names that I'm just not used to pronouncing. And I feel uncomfortable asking, because I feel like I'm picking on them because they have an unusual name, but I also don't want to just mispronounce their name at them and assume that I'm right. So I mean, I noticed on our emails that your full name is much longer. And I'm Emily. I'm quite often M. I use it as a shortcut because it's easier, and I'm happy with that. But I know there are a lot of people. Yes. We worked with Peter Ekwore Moefa, which took me ages to learn, but I can't do it without pulling the face. But he was Mr. E to all the kids, because the kids wouldn't or couldn't cope with learning his full name, and that would bug me. That would really annoy me. So things like, is that something that we need to be aware of in terms of, you know, would you have rather stuck with your full name, or did you go Uju because it's easy for us white people to pronounce and you got less grief for it?
Well, well, the good thing is, like, Uju is like it's just a shortening of my name in Nigeria as well. It's a very common shortening, so you know, I didn't sort of change it to Uju. I have I write about this in my book as well. Interestingly enough, I have a whole chapter which is about names and about how when I was growing up, you know, even just my name, there's 3 letters, you know, confounds people. And I used to just think, God, if I could just be called like Annabelle or, you know, Susan or something that just, you know, was normal. But actually, I think asking someone how to pronounce their name is the absolutely correct thing to do. You know, not every name is obvious, and even names that you think you can pronounce sometimes are pronounced completely differently. You know, it could be like something apple and they pronounce it apple or something in this day and age. Who knows? So I think that it's the intention behind the way you call someone's name is what's important. You know, if you ask somebody and if you make that effort, and even if you don't get it right the first time, you keep making the effort to get their name right. I think that's what matters, as opposed to just looking at a name and going, oh, I'm not going to bother with that. I'll just call you whatever, which happens as well.
Yeah, it really does. I've worked with teachers of various nationalities, and they've all, where they've had more unusual, particularly surnames, because as a teacher,
I think we're getting.
And yeah, they tend to resort to initials just because it's easier than having all these kids who just can't be bothered. Yeah, frustrating. Okay, so I think we're probably getting towards the end there. Is there anything else that we should know? Anything else that you haven't shared? Anything from the book that we haven't talked about yet that might be useful?
Yeah, a shame. I think just you know, be brave. You know, be brave. Have these conversations with your kids. Don't assume that they already have been taught about Martin Luther King at school, so therefore they're all clued up. Don't assume that they're too young. Don't assume they're too old to have these discussions. So yeah, just be brave in your conversations and keep having them.
Awesome. We'll figure all this out when we edit it for the podcast, because I think we've got a bit of lag going on there. I know you started talking visually before we could hear you, and then we could still hear you, and you'd stop talking and you were looking like, why aren't they saying anything? We had a bit of lag, but we'll fix it. Thank you so much for your time. It is very much appreciated. And we will make sure that we put links out for the book in
we've got some there.
And we'll find that clip as well if we can.
Indeed, and we will see if we can find the comedian.
Oh, I see. I know,
And I think we'll probably give up there on the grounds that we're about 30 seconds off each other, and this is all going to go wrong otherwise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
Massive
time.
thank you. And we look forward to reading the book.